You make your money in the land buy in this business. That's the largest increment of value is created in the land buy. Everything else after that, you're playing defense. You're trying to preserve the value already created.
Everyone's got a real estate story. Some are wins and some are total nightmares. We are here to give you the keys to what's really going on in Vancouver real estate, from what it actually takes to become a real estate agent to what it really costs to build a home, and all the stories in between. This is the real estate of things, where nothing is off the table and everything is negotiable.
My guest today, good friend and someone I've looked up to a lot in the real estate industry for a long time. It's Mr. Tony Kaleel, who's the president and COO of Northland Living, and really happy to have you here. So thanks for coming on.
Well, thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's going to be fun.
Yeah.
You've been, like I said, you and I have talked real estate ever since we've been kind of friends, and I've been in the business more or less since kind of we became friends and things like that. So I've always asked you questions, things like that, just with the business, and you've always been a really intelligent source. And it's always good to know and understand where that information comes from. And what I mean by that is, what is your background and how did you get to the role you're in today?
Essentially, been in this business my whole life. I started out at a young age helping my dad, who was a builder, developer, small scale, a lot of single family homes. At an early age, I was calling realtors for him to go look at single family lots and helping them do real estate contracts and buying land and building homes, and spent a lot of time on site. So caught the bug early, ended up going to school for real estate, urban land economics, bachelor's of real estate, and then eventually got into the development, large scale business in the early 2000s, which was a great time to be in the business. That's when, the real estate boom essentially started in Vancouver. Worked for a couple of large developers, Ani, Intracorp, for a long time, and then eventually co-founded Northland Living with Tom Gallardi in late 2021, early 2022.
Going way back when you're making those calls with your dad, calling real estate agents on properties that were listed, what was the reasoning that you were making the calls, I guess, as a young man, as a kid? What was kind of the reasoning for you to make it? Did he want to get you involved in the business at an early age and kind of put your foot in the fire kind of thing? Or
we had emigrated shortly before that to Vancouver. So we emigrated, I was 12. He started building homes about a year later when I was 13. I picked up the English language fairly quickly, so it was by necessity that I needed to translate for him the newspaper and translate for him, talking to the realtor that was selling the land.
So immigrated from Lebanon?
From North Africa.
Pardon me, from North Africa.
Yeah.
And was your dad, when you were in North Africa, was he building there as well? Or was this a new venture when you immigrated to Canada, to Vancouver?
Yeah, he was a large scale general contractor that built airplane hangars for the government and did that on a massive scale, government contracts, right? His story was he also left Lebanon in the, I think, early 60s to North Africa, Benghazi, Libya, when it was still a kingdom, and, worked his way up, eventually built his own company and built airplane hangars for the Libyan government is essentially what he did. And in the early mid 80s, decided, had 4 kids at the time, decided that, it's the common immigrant story that, he didn't see a lot of stability and security in the future of North Africa, Libya, and decided to immigrate to Canada because my uncle lived here. He lived in Surrey. And that's where we moved when we immigrated here, and that's where we got started.
God, really cool. I remember years and years and years ago, you kind of talked, or you have talked about how you come up through the business. You kind of talked to me one time about your first quote unquote development. And I think it was a story of your house, your family house in North Africa, was it not? And I think your dad had come to you and said you wanted more house, and you are actually kind of pricing out cinder block by cinder block on what it would cost.
No, that's my dad's story.
That's your dad's story?
Yeah. So my dad, very humble beginnings. My brother Ferris and I, who is we actually, I want to say in in the mid 90s, when we were last in Lebanon, walked through essentially the ghetto that my dad grew up in. And the story that my dad told me so he's one of 13 kids.
Holy moly.
Yeah. And they all lived in one room. And, he's just hardwired to be the workhorse and the earner. Got pulled out of school when he was like 10 years old to go work and earn a living to help his mom, provide.
Yeah.
And I think he would have been around 12 years old and sleeping in the same room with all his siblings.
Yeah.
And thinking about, okay, how do I create another room so we don't all have to sleep in the same room, and looking at the wall in front of him, which is, concrete blocks, right? Counting how many blocks it took to build a wall, and then going out at that age and trying to price what each block cost so he can, go make enough money to go build another room. Those are the stories that we grew up with, right? And the hardship and the setbacks, which I honestly would not change for anything, because it made us the people we are today. That resiliency, that toughness, that perseverance, that can-do attitude, and not taking anything for granted comes from experiencing that firsthand and hearing about it from my dad, who I've always looked up to and admired what he's been able to accomplish and what he's done for us to set us up for success.
Yeah, no, that's incredible. And like you say, you got it ingrained in you at an early age based on your dad's life experiences too, and, pursuing the development career that you came into. And that's really neat. Fast forwarding a bit, so your family immigrates to Vancouver, Greater Vancouver, and you guys more or less grew up in the Surrey, kind of Guildford area, right?
Correct.
So
yes.
High school there, and
we first elementary in the Guildford area. Literally, did not know the area at all. Moved where my uncle lived, not knowing the country, the language, the customs. It was hard, right? Especially, I was in grade 7. Ferris was in grade 5. And it was tough, tough growing up.
Yeah.
It was a tough area to begin with.
Yeah.
But we got through it. And it, getting through that made us tougher and made us more resilient. Eventually, my dad figured out what he needed to do, which is building homes. And we ended up moving to a better area in Surrey, building our own house, went to a better high school, and really started to catch our footing and settle in and build progress.
Yeah, it's cool. And then, like you said, you were a BCIT graduate.
Yeah, I went, BCIT, marketing diploma, real estate option. Then I did the urban land economics at UBC. Okay. And then after that, I completed a bachelor's of business in real estate, Thompson Rivers University.
Okay. And then...
and the UBC and Thompson Rivers, I was doing that while I was working.
Going into working. So you touched on, again, like I say, your career path and how you got to where you are today. But what was the first job out of school transitioning into the work world? Was it with Ani originally? Was that your first job?
First job was actually BC assessment for the government.
Okay.
And the strategy there for me was twofold. One, they were going to pay for my continued education, which I was, very interested in doing. And then two, the nature of that work is I could also still do stuff on the side with my old man, as far as single family lots and helping him out with his business.
So BC assessment, we all get those lovely letters once a year and it tells you what your home's worth and things like that. But more in depth, your role at BC assessment was, looking at hundreds of properties and doing your assessments. And like you said, that kind of entrenched you in understanding value and where value is
precisely
found, right?
It was great ground for how to value real estate.
Yeah. And how long were you there?
A little under 7 years.
Oh, wow. Okay. Yeah. I didn't know it was that long.
Yeah.
And kind of worked your way up through that. And what kind of made you, going again one step further, what made you move on from BC assessment?
It was always a stepping stone. It was always a means to an end. So once I completed my, again, urban land economics, UBC, and bachelor's of business in real estate, I basically now secured the education that I needed to secure. Also, just, it was time to go move on and do something bigger, which I'd always been keen on, to be in the development business, large scale, always intrigued by it, always saw it as meaningful work, and just, caught the bug early for that. Worked even when I was going to school. If I wasn't working for my dad, I'd work for, framing crew that my buddy owned, and would see like the developers come in, with their nice cars and fancy clothes. And, here we are slaving away as framers on site, but just kind of had a keen interest into eventually do that someday.
Okay. So talking about doing that someday, you move on from BC assessment and, you've got a ton experience with, analyzing property, all these kinds of things. And this is when you then take the path into the development sector.
Correct.
Right.
First job, Ani.
Okay.
Completely different world from where I came from as far as the public sector.
Was that early days of Ani?
No, Ani had been around for some time, but the market was early days of the boom.
Okay, and what year was that?
So that would have been early 2005. And so the run had maybe started 2 to 3 years before that. And so, this is a family, obviously, established, super successful. The guy running it was around my age when I joined the company. Great place to learn. Lots going on.
And you were brought on, what was your role with Ani?
I was in acquisitions.
You were acquisitions. So, purchasing, finding properties could be, prime for development.
Correct.
And basically securing them at the right dollar, or the right terms, things like that.
Yeah,
right?
Which my background and valuation, lended itself very well to that function of acquisitions, because it's an exercise of buying the land at the right price.
Yeah. And I mean, Ani, like you say, one of the biggest developers, obviously here in Vancouver, Canada, North America now even too, right? Like they've gone all through the United States. And
it's a phenomenal success story for sure.
And, you were brought in there, like you said, the boom had kind of started, but the growth of the company, you must have seen Ani go from A to B very quickly in terms of the size and what they were doing.
Absolutely. When I was there and then after I left, I was only there for about a couple of years, and then I left to join Intracorp after that.
Right. Just touching on the Ani thing again, what was that workplace like? Because it's very dynamic from what I know and understand, and especially in the time that you were there at the earlier years, let's call it, of that business. And now it's become so much larger today.
Yeah.
But what was that environment like to work in?
High energy, a lot of young people, smart people, hardworking, very entrepreneurial in minds. Lots going on, right? I mean, their timing and their investment strategy, the timing could not have been any better, right? They made absolutely the most of it, in my mind. A lot of things going on, and if you were paying attention and willing to take on the work, it was a great learning opportunity.
So you left Ani, and like you said, your next step was to Intracorp. Why did you leave Ani? Was it a bigger role that was offered with Intracorp, or was it something different that you were pursuing, or what made you want to make the change to a different company, different developer? Yeah,
I think mostly just wanted a company that was a bit, I guess, more compatible with where I was. I got married at an early age, kids at an earlier age, relatively speaking, and also wanted an opportunity to do something on a grander scale with a specific role. So saw the opportunity at Intracorp. They were looking for an acquisitions guy. It's also owned by Joe Hussein, who's a Lebanese guy.
Yeah. Perfect fit.
Yeah. And a bit, more corporate in structure, and, a bit more of a runway for me in that role, as opposed to Ani, which, was a bit more competitive and maybe crowded in that space, right? Not to take away anything from my experience at Ani. I mean, I was grateful for the opportunity and the shot I was given, and learned a lot, made great relationships there, which I have till this day. But it was just, looking for a better fit. And, it was Intracorp ultimately, which, that would have been 2007.
That's when you went to Intracorp?
Yeah.
Okay.
Late 2007, which was an interesting time because that was shortly before the 2008 crash. And so it was a market that was running white hot from basically, call it 2000, 2001 up until 2008. And now I was at Intracorp. And, obviously the big crash happened in late 2008. You didn't really know what it was going to look like at the time. I mean, the sky felt like it was falling, right?
Right, yeah.
And as it turned out, it was just a little speed bump here in Vancouver. I mean, it was maybe 6 to 8 months exercise of uncertainty. It was actually a great opportunity for me at Intracorp. The way it turned out, Intracorp did not really have a lot of land holdings. Most of their projects had been built out and substantially closed. That's why they were looking for a good acquisitions guy.
Yeah,
right?
Find more dirt.
So the first couple of years at Intracorp, actually, I didn't buy any land, which for some people, that was a problem because it's a merchant developer and there's nothing you can do at a development company if you don't have land. But my view was it just wasn't the right time. I turned out to be right. To his credit, Intracorp CEO saw it my way. Anyway, 2008 happens, and starting in early 2009, I just went on an incredible run buying land. In the couple of years, 2009 to 2011, I bought like close to $200 million worth of land.
And predominantly downtown area, or where?
Everywhere. Vancouver, Burnaby were the predominant markets, and the getting was good. I mean, there was obviously fear and greed, right? People were very fearful 2008, and it felt like one of very few, if not the only blue chip developer, especially early on after 2008, to start getting after land deals.
And that was mostly because, like you said, the 2008 crash and sellers potentially fearful of what the future value of this land holds.
Sure.
Who knows if the market's going to come back is kind of their mentality. And they're saying,
absolutely,
man, we better
unload
this property.
Uncertainty. Sellers are way more willing to sell because it's the unknown. Like, what is this crash? What's it going to look like? Does it ever come back? And, we still didn't know either, but we also had the advantage of putting land under contract and getting a lot of time before we needed to close on anything. So we basically locked up the land.
Yeah.
And we're in a position where we would be in control of it and didn't have to close on it until we got comfortable that the market was back. And as it turned out, the market came back with vengeance.
Yeah, absolutely. So that run, like you said, from 2009, 2011 was when a lot of the purchasing happened with Intracorp.
So I was at what's really interesting, I was at Intracorp from 2007 and I ended up leaving in 20, right?
Okay.
So call it, I think it was 12 and a half, 13 years, but I only actually bought land for 6 out of those years.
Right.
And, I'm a student of this business. I read a lot about not just real estate, but investment psychology. And you make your money in the land buy in this business. That's the largest increment of value is created in the land buy.
Yeah.
Everything else after that, you're playing defense. You're trying to preserve the value already created, right? And one of the surest ways you can lose a lot of value is by over-designing and not managing construction costs well. You can leak a lot of money in the construction phase of the development. So my focus has always been buy right, create value in the buy. And that's all about timing. Right? Yeah. That's about, what's the rest of the market doing, right? Is it a feeding frenzy or is there a lot of fear, right? And couple that with an understanding and a belief in the fundamentals of the marketplace and the optimism that, it will come back, understanding that this is a cyclical business, that housing is a fundamental human need. It'll never be obsolete. Yeah. It's not a question of if, it's a question of when. So those 6 years I thought were that was the sweet spot of when we can do deals. And I did that. I was never, ever emotional about it. I never had any motivation besides, does this make financial sense? Can we risk mitigate it? At Intracorp, I ended up doing 18 different projects.
In your time that you were there?
Yeah.
Right.
Including my last project there, which was in Austin, 49-story high-rise, 44 East. So 18 different projects, which basically amounted to about 3,000 homes and over $2 billion of top line revenue. And the average project IRR was just under 30%.
And is that a pretty strong margin?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, that's as good as you're gonna, it's very strong.
Okay.
Right. And that's just project level. You haven't even leveraged the money without getting into the technicals, but you can put together a partnership, a general partner, limited partners, and you leverage with bank money, and then the general partner leverages with limited partner equity, and that 30% IRR turns out to be a lot higher for the general partner, which is what we were at Intracorp for all of these deals, right? 17 out of the 18 deals were off-market deals, meaning they were not listed and widely marketed. We'd actually sourced the opportunity ourselves and did the deal directly without brokers. Again, the thinking is the greatest value is created in the land buy. So if it's a competitive situation, that value gets
diminished,
whittled down or competed away. If you're exclusive, chances are you're going to, the ability to keep most of that value.
So 17 of the 18 projects that you did were done privately?
Off market, directly with owners, yes. And the 18, which actually was the Versatile building in Lower Lonsdale, that was on market deal. And it was an expensive buy, but we had excess density from Vista Place, which is a nearby project that we could move to this site to average down our land costs per square foot.
Okay.
And that's why it made sense for us.
So what I'm hearing is it was a very successful time that you were at Intracorp, obviously, and you were directly reporting to the owner, founder, Joe Hussein.
No, the CEO.
CEO.
Don Forsgren, yeah.
Okay.
Reporting directly to him, yes.
So moving the clock a little bit forward, what made you leave Intracorp and then pursue what is now your current role, your current position, things like that? What was the mindset there?
Yeah, I mean, a couple of things. One, the pandemic, right? World is turned upside down. It was kind of a seminal moment for me. Been there 13 years. Great time at Intracorp. Lots of wins, lots of victories. It was a great platform for me to build a brand and a reputation, right? For doing good deals, learned a lot. But eventually, 12, 13 years onwards, it just felt like it was time to move on. And always had an interest in, doing something that I was leading. I had an equity stake in as well. So I left really during the pandemic without really knowing what the next move was, except that it felt right that it was just time to move on. A year and a half later, Northland Living was born. Tom Lang, who ran Northland Capital, and Tom Gallardi, of course, the owner of Northland, had been investors in my Intracorp deals.
So they would, for those who kind of don't know and understand that, they would be investors from their financial kind of that company.
Yeah.
They would finance or put equity into the projects that you were at Intercorp, and they were a partner on a certain level. So you already had a working relationship with them.
Yes.
Over years. They saw how you operated. They saw how you did deals, things like that.
Correct.
Right?
Yeah. Tom Lang and I had become good friends. Actually, he's the first guy I went to when I ended up finding my first deal on my own, which is Luminary, which is the condo project in Austin. Sourced that opportunity, went to him to be my capital backer for that deal, which he agreed to do. And we were working on that. But that conversation eventually evolved into, again, just given the history and the success, the idea of, well, instead of doing one-offs, why don't we create like a permanent platform? It'd be another Northland brand, and we could start this development arm of the company, which is a natural transition of the Northland Properties umbrella. I mean, it's a real estate company, has a lot of real estate interest besides hospitality and restaurants, etc. So that conversation started to take place, and it led into Northland Living, which, primary purpose is to develop existing land holdings, and there's a number of them across Canada, and the US, in particular Texas, as well as identify its own development opportunities like Luminary.
Right.
And so that's how the whole thing came together.
Yeah. And they wanted someone that they knew, they trusted. So that's when Northland Living was created, and it's been successful as a joint partnership, I guess you could call it. But what you were really wanting when you went and started Northland Living with Tom Glardy, Tom Lang, you wanted skin in the game. You wanted an opportunity to stand out more or less on your own, but to be calling the shots, like you say, right? You found that that's what it's giving you now, right?
Yeah. I mean, this not necessarily calling the shots, but certainly given the operational freedom to run a business the way I, believe it should be run, right? I still have an investment committee that I have to report to. And obviously, these are massive investments. Development is not as straightforward, right? Can be quite complex.
Yeah.
There's a lot of external factors that dictate its success. It's nothing you really want to do in a vacuum in isolation. It's always advantageous to have, surround yourself with very smart people, good business acumen, debate the right decisions and actions, check your thinking, cover your blind spots, and then ultimately get a green light to go execute a plan that's been approved. As it relates to the environment and the culture, it's entrepreneurial. You get a lot of freedom to execute on a business plan. Absolutely is something that I was looking for and feel very fortunate to have at Northland.
So finding, the opportunities, the land when you were at Intracorp or when you're at Ani, or also including your current role, what is, kind of the steps, from deals done, working backwards? What are the steps? What are you looking for in a property? What are kind of some of the key features, things like that make it interesting? And then what kind of goes on with that acquisition process?
Two biggest drivers of our business is job growth and population growth.
Mm-hmm.
So you got to check those two boxes off, right? And then when you identify what that market is, you look at, competing projects, right? How are they doing? What prices are they achieving? How are things selling? And then you kind of reverse engineer the numbers to see if there's margin, if you can take on projects in that market and make money. And then that's followed by, okay, yes, we can make money here. Now you got to find a piece of land, right? And of course, as I said earlier, my view is you got to find the right piece of land and buy it at the right price, because that's where you're making your money, right? And so what's the right piece of land? Well, there's a bunch of things you got to look at, right? But the biggest stuff is, you want to minimize approval risk, right? So you don't want to take on something that has a lot of risk in terms of entitling it and developing what you want to develop on it, right? So that is one of probably the first things you look at. And then, the geometry of the site and the topography of the site. How easy is it to access for, crews to build it, right? So there's a lot of things that you go through, and we could probably spend an hour talking just about that. But you end up doing the deal. You always want some time for underwriting and due diligence before you close on it. And then from there, now you got to assemble the whole team, right? It takes a lot of people to design it, entitle it, price it, you build it, sell it, close on it, finance it, right?
Yeah.
Pay back the money. So my job as a developer, it's like you're an orchestrator, an arranger, right? You know where the value's made, where the value's lost. Once you secure the land and the opportunity, then it's about putting the right team together. Right?
Yeah.
And it's making sure that team is rowing in the same direction, and then executing on your business plan. And that business plan calls out everything you need to do in terms of program and product positioning and what you need to achieve in prices, and what your costs need to come in at, and what your schedule and timeline looks like, and all of that needs to come together to make money. And it's your job to call all those shots, call all those plays, and make sure that you're, on target, on plan.
And I think that, and like you said, you put that in a very compact format because there's so many different things that go into the acquisition of getting the land, looking at the topography, looking at all these things, and then purchasing the land, and then going through the process of building and, material costs and all these things. There is a stigma with developers, and they're all, super rich and all these kinds of things, right? And where there's risk, there's reward too, right? You and I obviously being good friends, we chat all the time, and you're going through a development right now, like you talked about in Austin, and all these things that come into play throughout the entire process, whether it be world politics with what's going on in the United States, whether it's material costs or, sales centers or the US economy in the market that we're building in, it's fallen through the floor, all these sorts of things. And once you start these high-rise projects, they're going, right? You're not stopping halfway to let the market recover or anything like that. So going back to kind of the stigma of all these rich, wealthy developers, well, in some cases that is true. But like I say, where there's risk, there can be a reward. And I don't think there's enough light shined on that aspect of it, of how much risk is put into these projects, because they're massive scales. And like I say, it's in some ways a slow moving train that you can't take off the track. Talking about the building, the development side of it too, right? But there's so many unknowns, you try to forecast that risk or mitigate the risk rather, but there's a lot of things you can't control. And that's where, the profit margin can vary for you. But like I say, some people think, the developers, they all get rich. And, the good ones who are doing the business, who are purchasing the land correctly, like you say, yeah, they're going to be successful with it, but it's with a real process that comes with it too, right?
Absolutely. I mean, you hit a lot of it right on the head. It's capital intensive, a lot of money upfront, high risk, high reward, a lot of external factors. Sometimes you don't even see coming.
Yeah.
Right? That could put a wrench in things. It's organizing the effort of a lot of people.
Yeah.
It's not an easy business. And there's a lot of other ways that you can make money that are much easier. But I love it. It's meaningful work. The feeling of driving by a development that you played an instrumental role in with your son, and, you point at it and you tell him the story and it's there for a very long time. That's meaningful.
For sure. Right? You've built something.
Yeah. That's gratifying. I mean, landing in Vancouver airport and being able to point out to the projects that you played a key part in. And that's just, very gratifying. Also, all the economic spin-off you create and the people you hire and, the jobs that they do to feed their families and employ people. It is truly something special, right? But there's a lot of risk with it. It can go wrong in a multitude of ways, right?
Yeah.
And there is a right way to do it. There's a wrong way to do it. But even if you do it, you're doing all the right things. That doesn't mean the market or an external factor is not going to present itself and derail your plans. So is there a great reward? Absolutely. But it comes with a great deal of effort and a great deal of risk.
You talked about your run when you were with Intracorp from 2009 to 2011 and, with a lot of land purchases, 17 of the 18 being private, obviously, and predominantly those properties were lower mainland, kind of greater Vancouver area. Towards the tail end of your time, your career with Intracorp, you shifted a bit and started pursuing projects in Austin, Texas, and other markets that you found that could be potentially more fruitful. And with, especially now with your role with Northland Living, very similar to that, where you're finding opportunities in places outside of Vancouver. Would you say that Vancouver is it become increasingly more challenging to build in Vancouver for the reason of land prices, and then in relation to building costs, in relation to return on that investment, things like that? Is it almost a lot of developers on the large scale that you're on have a lot of them exited the Vancouver market. Now we're still seeing towers downtown being built and things like that, but have the vast majority started exploring other areas, the big kind of blue chip developers?
Let me take you back a little bit on how things unfolded with Intracorp when I was there. So 2009 to 2011, I went on that big run, right? I stayed active, though, buying land up until 2015. And the last 4 deals I did there leading into that 2015, I was aggressively underwriting land. Specifically, I was speculating on top line revenue to make the land number work, which was a very uncomfortable thing to do. And the reason it got there is because, the market had been running hot for a long time, attracted a lot of investment, local and foreign, which is the nature of any, market or industry, right? If there's money being made, it's going to attract attention. There's other money that's going to pursue, those profits. And those margins start to get competed away, right? So it got to the point where it started to feel really uncomfortable. Long story short, I went to our CEO and then eventually the owner of the company, Joe, and made a case to expand into another market. Did not really know what that market was going to be. Went on a 3-4 months exercise with my team to identify what that market was, looked at all types of criteria. And Austin, Texas was either at the top or very near the top of all the boxes we were looking to check, right? And so ended up expanding there, secured 44 East, built a team around it. That was the last deal I did at Intracorp Development, which was a wildly successful project. So that's how, I transitioned into another market. It was just really a view and a belief, again, centered around a couple of things. One, seeing my old man struggle in the 90s in a tough market and learning those lessons early. And then 2, just being a student of the business and investment psychology and what looked like was going to be an unsustainable run-up. Now, there's a lot of people that still remained active and made money after I left this market, right? Yeah. To be clear. But it just started to get uncomfortable for me to continue doing what I was doing the way I was doing it. And that's the idea for a new market, was generated. Where we are today in Vancouver is that, problem continued to get compounded, right? Land way too expensive. Construction costs are way too high. And that problem only got worse after the pandemic, increasingly more challenged with all the tariffs and all that talk, right? People, the buying public, everything is expensive. Affordability is a real problem. Can no longer afford the homes that they need, right? And so now you look at the variables in the equation you need to satisfy in a development pro forma, especially for what you can sell the end product for, right? And the reality is there is very little, if anything, that can pencil. You remember very early on we were talking about, find a market and see if you can make a margin building something. Yeah. Well, in my view, and I, admittedly, I've not been as active in Vancouver as I have been, but I have a lot of friends in this business still active, and it's none of the numbers work, and it's constraining supply. So you still have population growth, you still have housing need. The supply that is in place that started a while ago, eventually it's going to all get absorbed, and the economics are such that developers can't make any deals pencil. So you're going to get a problem where there's no supply with continued demand, and affordability is going to continue to be a challenge until something gives. Those variables of input need to be recalibrated, right? Yeah. Like the way you value land, the right way to value land is, it's called the land residual approach to value, right? Land residual value. So essentially what that means is in a development pro forma, you figure out what you can sell the product for what it's going to cost you to build it, and plus a margin for yourself because you're not doing it for free, right? Yeah. And whatever is left over, you can pay for the land.
Okay.
Right? So now the cost inputs are too high in relation to what you can sell it for. So there is no margin. And in many cases, you can't even pay anything for the land. Mm-hmm. In some cases, they're going to have to give you money. They're going to actually have to pay you to develop the land because you still need to make a margin, again, given how risky this business is and all the things that can go wrong. So the whole market is kind of stuck. And this is not actually just limited to Vancouver. This is now, I'm seeing the same problem in Austin.
Okay.
Right. And it's a multitude of things, but construction costs, cost of money, affordability, not just real estate, but everything is expensive. Right. It just all sets up for a disconnect between what you need as a developer to underwrite costs and margin and what the market can actually bear in terms of sale price for end product. They're just completely out of whack.
And I hear what you're saying and about the Vancouver market, that it's in a bit of a stalemate situation and that there's no margin, becoming increasingly more difficult to build for, that being one of the main primary reasons. What do you think in a kind of elevator pitch? What's it gonna take to turn Vancouver's market around where, we kind of theoretically rewind the clock a bit and it becomes more advantageous again for development to be happening again in the city, things like that? What do you think would be a big change, a big factor in that?
That is a really good question. I mean, and a very difficult one to answer. I really don't know. I mean, we talk about, as industry people talk about that all the time, right? The run up in Vancouver was anchored on a couple of key ingredients, right? There was a lot of capital inflow and it was easy credit, cheap money. And those two things just fueled the market for a very long time.
Yeah.
So now you look at, okay, those two variables are not here anymore. So what's it going to take? I have more questions than answers on that, but I would say it's either going to be a big shock, right? Where everything resets and quickly and abruptly, and there's going to be collateral damage there. And then there's, a steady incline after that. Or it's going to be a slow drip, sloping downward, which takes a long time to reset everything, right? Of course, governments and central banks can play a role here, right?
For sure.
So you need to do things that are going to incentivize activity and investment. I think you're starting to see some government or, federal government, provincial government, local government starting to make attempts at that, right? People also, generally speaking, like the sentiment is not great. Mm-hmm. People just don't feel good, right? Like they're worried, they're uncertain, right? About everything they see and hear on the news on a daily basis. Now, nothing too good or too bad lasts forever, right? Like I'm an optimistic guy. This thing is going to work itself out. Again, we're talking about housing, a fundamental human need. Mm-hmm. The market will get there. I just don't know how long that's going to take.
When we sell, say, a lot or a piece of property to someone and they're going to build their house on it, some of the surprises we hear through their process of the building is, the city or the district or the township or whatever, they want $100,000 for this water connection and they want $200,000 for this. And they want, all these, some soft costs, some hard costs, things like that play a role. And even on the single family development side, as this, it's become increasingly hard to build and the costs are skyrocketing, things like that. Do you find that the path to develop on a larger scale, not talking about with Vancouver in comparison to say like Austin, has Vancouver caused or implemented or caused too many roadblocks, stumbling blocks for development that the pathway is a little bit or far more easy in areas like Austin, Texas or LA or, New York or something like that? Do you think that Vancouver's made as a city and, talking about greater Vancouver or even City of Vancouver, have they put in too many challenges for developers to say, oh, you have to conform to this and you have to do this and you have to do this? And a lot of the developers are just putting their hands up and they're going, we're going to other markets. Like, this doesn't work. Are you seeing that as a major factor too?
Absolutely. 100%. I mean, development charges, energy codes, on-site water detention, all of these things are very expensive.
Yeah.
Also, how long it takes you to get out of City Hall with a building permit.
Yeah, it's crazy.
Getting it rezoned, right? It's, extremely challenging, right? Is it easier in Austin, in Texas? Yeah, I think it's easier. Is Austin also dealing with its own set of growing pains? Absolutely. I mean, it was a lot easier and less costly to entitle 44 East versus Luminary. I think, and I'm only speculating, cities like Vancouver and, other cities in Metro Vancouver, I think overwhelmed by the sheer level of activity. And I don't think they did a good job planning for it. Like right. For staffing, for policy, they were all, by all indications caught off guard. There was also a huge generational shift. Like there's a lot of the old planners that, might have presided over, early Vancouver days and development and planning that retired or left. And there's a new guard that's come in and taken their places and, maybe not as experienced, maybe not as in tune with what it takes to do this well on the business side. At the same time, I mean, they're grappling with their own requirements and mandates. Like, you got to be fair about, the volume of activity they're dealing with. There's things that, as it relates to energy modeling and water management. I mean, some of this stuff makes sense and needs to happen. And the approach has been combative and less collaborative, right? And so developers are getting frustrated that it's making it even more difficult. We've already talked about the difficulties developers are facing, but it's even more difficult when you're dealing with, cities that are just uncompromising and, not helping or collaborating in any way for something that society as a whole needs, housing, right?
Yeah.
I think it's probably not as much friction on that front in my experience in markets like Texas. I think the cities there in Austin and in Dallas and other cities in Texas, there's a more of a willingness to cooperate with developers. There is more desire to help businesses get their business plan off the ground and running.
Yeah, and it seems like a common theme, in Vancouver, not trying to make Vancouver the bad guy or anything like that, but it seems like a common theme in many industries that you hear this with the greater Vancouver area, where it's, constant roadblocks and challenges and things like that. And you do hear where other economies have had success, large success. You have a government or, the people there that are pro-business, wanting to have everyone succeed, right? And you're obviously going to look for an opportunity like that on the development side, where it's not going to be maybe as challenging in some aspects of the business, right, for it. Shifting gears a bit, kind of going back to the development side and the planning side of what you're going to build, whether it's a high rise, if it's in Austin or if it's wherever, we see a lot of different styles of buildings and things like that in Vancouver, but how do you kind of come up with the concept of what you're going to build in terms of, how many penthouse units are we going to have? How many 2-bed, 2-bath units are we going to have? How many 1-bedrooms? Are you looking at what's going on, obviously, in that market currently, what's selling well? And then how do you kind of come up with a formula, a layout, a plan for what's going to be in that building?
Yeah, I mean, you pull back from the market, right? You got to understand and figure out what's selling well and at what price, and can you make money developing it? A lot of, in terms of the built form, most of that is dictated by cities and their...
Meaning the amount of levels on the building.
Yeah, local area plans, official community plans, zoning bylaws are all going to dictate what you can build.
Put a pin in that for a second. So what the hell happened in Brentwood, in Burnaby? right? You got these skyscrapers, like giant things.
Yeah.
And there was obviously a plan at one point in time where that was not the eventual plan for Brentwood. And now you have these things, you drive along the number one highway and they're just gargantuan, right? So what happened there?
Well, that's essentially trans-oriented development. There's a SkyTrain running through there.
Yeah.
That plan was designed and developed to accommodate that kind of density and those kind of heights. Again, the thinking is you don't sprawl out to create density, you build up and you concentrate that density around mass transit lines. You get people out of their cars and you get them on the train.
Yeah.
Right. And so that's all plan compliant. Mm-hmm. The city of Burnaby allows all of that to happen based on their, I think it's called the Brentwood Plan. I can't remember the name of it, but yeah, that was all permissible. And so when that plan got approved, developers started to take positions around it and started to develop those sites compliant with the plan and what the plan allowed.
Gotcha. So, and then going back to the plan, the formula, the layout of how many 1 bedrooms, 1 bath, things like that. You got to look at what's selling, like you say. And is there a margin in it for us?
Absolutely. So it's a lot of market research. It's a lot of conversations with the people selling it and what their experience is. The unit mix itself, I want to make sure that, the market experts, project marketers, sales teams are plugging in. We're hearing them out. They're making recommendations on, mixture of units, size of units, what to put in each unit, right? All of that is a collaborative effort. And then as a developer, you got to balance that with the economics of the deal, right? What you need to accomplish or achieve in sale prices, in sales velocity, and in construction costs.
How important do you see the sales center? Do you see that as kind of like the first date for the buyer? And at what point, based on those sales, is the project, quote unquote, greenlit for hitting the ground, pouring concrete, digging the hole, all those kinds of things?
In terms of the need for a sales center, Vancouver is a market. I grew up in and obviously learned this business in. And then I have experience in Austin, right? The standard and the delivery of sales centers in Vancouver is like, some of the best in North America.
Really?
If not the best. Absolutely.
Okay.
This is a market that is perfected the pre-sales phase of this business, right? And so, the idea there is you're selling homes before you're delivering them. And to do that well and maximize value, the prospective buyer is going to be able to come in and understand what your offering is.
Touch, feel, and see.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And gain enough confidence that they commit to buying a unit, which you're going to deliver 3 years later, right? They're going to put a substantial deposit down and they're going to wait for you to deliver that unit. And so when we first went to Austin, we built a, best-in-class sales center in that market, in keeping with what we would typically do up here in Vancouver.
And you had that model from Vancouver that you carried to Austin.
Absolutely.
So were other developers that were already currently or had been in Austin and still are in Austin for a long time, were they doing?
No.
They weren't?
Nowhere close.
So you made a bang.
Oh, yeah. We raised the bar. We spent way more money and everybody knew it and understood it, right? But were they doing that? No. Nowhere close. Again, different market, different set of expectations. Did we have to do that? It's arguable. I'm not sure that we did, but we did it and the project was successful.
Yeah, it was well received.
Yeah,
incredibly.
Absolutely. You have to meet a pre-sale condition, which is set by the bank,
right?
Your construction lender. And they basically say what percentage of sales they want to see in order for you to start construction.
So it's not a hard line set by, local government or cities.
No.
It's 100% comes from the lender.
It's mostly the lender, and then some developers will have their own requirements because, again, they're in risk mitigation mode, right? So they want to see proof of concept and enough uptake for them to continue on with the investment.
Yeah.
Right. And so pre-sales, usually it's 50%. Right now in this market, it's probably higher than that. Right?
Because of the risk level,
because of the risk, right? And then there's going to be minimum deposit requirements, right? And that could change if you're an end user versus an investor.
Yeah.
How much money you're going to put down. Again, it's just mitigating risk and who's speculating and who has a real need for a house, right? So it's a multitude of factors, but largely that pre-sale condition is driven by the lender, the construction lender.
Talking about Vancouver, talking about, it's being increasingly harder for developers to build based on the costs of the land, the development, the materials, all these sorts of things that are happening, which in turn gets handed off to the buyer, and it becomes a more increasingly expensive place to live, Vancouver, not that it isn't already. And with that, in relation to the social housing aspect, are we going to see more social, in your opinion, do you think we'll see an increased demand from, say, City of Vancouver, talking about downtown core area? Do you think that will increase in terms of how much social housing will be required because of, again, just all things being extremely expensive in Vancouver, condos, if you're buying them, becoming increasingly more expensive? Do you think those numbers will inflate on the mandate that's placed on developers?
Tough to say, right? It depends on the government and the political will, right? They're trying to solve the affordability problem, obviously, right? And so in a city like Vancouver, where do the waiters live, or the creative people, or
which you have to have? Yeah,
the people that are, going to give the city its energy and service and life. Right?
Yeah.
Like, how is the city going to function if, those people can't live in it? And increasingly, it's everywhere is expensive. It's not just Vancouver. Right?
Totally.
So they're trying to solve that problem, which is a complicated problem. Is that the right way? It presents its own challenges in terms of, again, if developers can't make the numbers work, nothing is going to get built. There was a period of time where those numbers did work and stuff got built and social housing got delivered. It's difficult to do that now, right? So does that continue to be the solution? I don't know. If probably not, unless something changes, right?
Yeah.
So I understand the issue. I have kids, you have kids. We were fortunate enough to come up in a time where we could afford housing, and we got in and we have it.
Yeah.
This younger generation, not so much, right? And unless we're helping out our kids, they're not going to get the homes, right? And in any case, they're probably going to get less home than we got.
Yeah.
Even with our help, right? So it's a real problem, right? And it's very complicated, and there's a lot of competing forces, and I'm not going to sit here and say that it's an easy solution. I don't know what the right solution is. But my hope is, through market forces and political will, we can land somewhere that, we can get back to doing the right thing and providing housing for everybody.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Going a little bit more back into the development side, and when you're in that planning and preparation stage of a project, high rise, what are you looking for in terms of an architect? And I think I touched on that briefly before. In, some of the stuff that Vancouver's getting, I think is really great, like the Butterfly Building and Vancouver House, and being able to stand out. Speaking specifically on the architect or architecture of a building, how do you make that selection process? And a lot of that, the rules, the constraints are put on you by local government and things like that on what you can and can't do. What makes that final selection you're going to go with this firm rather than?
A couple of things. This is all going to be specific to the developer, their view of the business, and their approach, how I want to do things. So I have my own philosophy, my own approach. So for me, I always want to start with the opportunity and pull back from the market in terms of what type of project this needs to be for that site, for that point in time. So I start there. And that's based on a lot of market research and, feet on the ground, talking to market experts and really understanding what the right development program is. Okay. Once you have that settled, now you got to basically put together the team to bring that vision to life. So I will always, after having done that research, start with a vision statement of what this project needs to be. Okay. Now that vision statement helps me dictate the kind of team I want to put together on this, right? So architect, but not just architect consultants, not just architect consultants, but also the general contractor that's going to build it, right? My view, certainly enough developers do not pay enough attention to the dynamics within that team. And you're truly building a team.
Right.
Right. And there's winning teams and losing teams, right? And a lot of that has to do with team chemistry, prior experience, personality types, team-oriented players versus, superstars that want everything done their own way. So I lean on team and team chemistry and proven track record and prior experience. And I go to great lengths making sure that I'm assembling the team that is going to have that chemistry and that proven track record that I can leverage to create a special project, right? So in terms of the architect, I will say, they need to be coachable. They need to understand the business well enough, and that at the end of the day, I got to make money. Right? Yeah. That it's not just, I love design and building beautiful product, and that's very important, not to minimize that at all, right? But it can't happen in isolation, right? There is a business plan that needs to be executed, right? And so the design team, architects, consultants, etc., and the general contractor with the construction expertise, from day one, they're sitting at the same table. And so that's the desired end result. And my job is to put together the right team, all disciplines, that's capable of doing that together, right? And not a team where you have one powerful force that's not going to be cooperative, not going to play as a team, and is going to be counterproductive towards reaching that end goal.
Yeah, and I like what you said, how you encourage the debate in that, the general contractors in the room with the architect and the consultants.
And the salespeople.
And your salespeople.
Yeah,
what's going to sell, what's not.
Absolutely.
And, far too many times, whether it's building a single family home or a high rise, you get on site and that's not going to work, or you're already coming out of the ground. You want to have that discussion when it's on flat paper in a boardroom kind of thing, where you can iron out those kinks, have those debates, like you say, and say, this is more practical for the construction process and on how we're going to build it for these reasons, or this isn't going to work. Where do you see the biggest opportunities potentially, in development, kind of in the next decade? Do you think it's going to make a resurgence here in Vancouver and Canada again, parts of the United States that are, pro-development? Where do you see the big opportunities potentially coming?
I mean, tough to say, but, generally speaking, people go where there is jobs and where they can afford to live. And there's a lot of things that drive that.
Yeah.
Right. And so, politically, economically, and so on. So that's what I look for as a developer, right? Where is growth taking place? Where are jobs being created? Where is business incentivized? Where are people moving? And, the world we live in today, there's a lot of political tension. And there's a lot more things that you got to think through to answer those questions. In my research, when we were looking for a new market to expand into, a lot of the markets that were near the top were red state, pro-business, job growth, population growth, relatively more affordable. That's where the people were going. Yeah. And we build homes for people that are going there, right?
Yeah.
So
you're fulfilling a demand. We talked earlier about your path to where you are today, successfully today, and all the way back to your education, not only just from growing up how you did with the construction background with your dad, things like that, but your time at BCIT and going on to work for BC Assessment and things like that. I think a lot of people who will listen to this, you obviously have a very, very keen understanding and knowledge of the market cycles, things like that. If anyone's looking to get into any aspect, I guess, of the real estate industry, but more specifically the development side, what would you say is the tools to success from an educational standpoint to get to where you've gotten to? Is BCIT still the best candidate out there with the best program for real estate development, construction, things like that? Or what other advice would you give someone who wants to be in development, in real estate development, things like that?
Couple of things. I mean, I, kind of stumbled my way into my career, figuring it out on my own. I didn't really have the guidance from my parents who are new immigrants, dropped out of elementary because they had to at a very early age to help their families. So a lot of this stuff I figured out on my own. And what I did figure out is a couple of things. One, you got to be curious and you got to commit to continual learning, continual improvement. I mean, I would tell you my biggest single advantage is reading.
You always have a book. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. So in terms of how my education unfolded, right? BCIT, which was great, fantastic, highly recommend it. It just gets students job ready just by the volume of work. It's 8 courses a term, and then everything is team-based and deadline and pressure. So that's, for me, great training ground for what the real world is. But I also studied at UBC for my urban land economics diploma. And then I eventually studied, I got my bachelor's of business in real estate at Thompson River University, which was through open learning, right? Which was great in terms of learning the business, the theory. But at the same time, I got out there and I took shots and I tried different things. So it's being curious, committing to learning, and getting out there and tinkering and taking shots and talking to people. And even if you take a job that you're not necessarily thrilled about, there's always something to learn, and it can always be used as a stepping stone to something else. And that's just propensity for action.
Right.
Right? It's just getting out, trying things, taking shots, right? Eventually, you start to get a feel for what you like, what turns you on, what you want to do. But you don't do that through inactivity. You do that by learning, by trying, by failing, dealing with setbacks, getting back up, and persevering.
Well, this has been awesome.
Man, yeah, I enjoyed it.
Yeah, really fun. Can't thank you enough taking time out of your crazy schedule to be here. And, there's a ton of information here. It's just fascinating. And as we know, Vancouver is built on real estate, right? So to hear it from...
It's a real estate town, yes.
So to hear it from one of the best has been special. So thanks again. If you enjoyed this podcast, please do follow, subscribe, leave us a review. Thanks again, Tony Kaleel, for coming on.
My absolute pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Yeah.
Thanks for hanging out with us. And remember, in Vancouver real estate, nothing's off the table and everything's negotiable. Subscribe now to The Real Estate of Things wherever you get your podcasts.